What is up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of First Date Unsolved. Today, we are covering the 5-year-old missing persons case of Christopher Dietterick. Chris disappeared all the way back on May 30th, 2019, and since then, his sister Sarah hasn't stopped searching for him. She's told his story hundreds of times at this point, and she's going to continue to talk about Chris until he's found. Chris's story was recently featured on a podcast called Gone in a Blink, a live recording of a show named Locating the Lost, and a very popular show called The Vanished. I've already shared the links to all of these over on social media, over on Facebook. So if you are interested in checking those out, I do encourage it. Please head over to my page. That's all there. So you can listen to those as well as my coverage. And really quick, before I get into this, I want to just start by apologizing to Sarah because she and I spoke all the way back in April. I recorded 98 minutes of audio and I really struggled with how I wanted to portray the events that took place. Since his story is finally getting traction and there are other sources for you to go check out, I didn't want to just regurgitate everything that's already been said a bunch of times. Obviously, there are important details that shouldn't be skipped over, but I didn't want to just tell the same story that you can hear in 3, 4, 5 other places. I hope that makes sense, and I hope that doesn't come off as offensive or disrespectful because I am just as invested in this as I am all of the other cases that I talk about. I just wasn't sure exactly how I wanted to say, or I wasn't sure what I wanted to say, how I wanted to say it. Do I get on here and bash the Elkton police because this man's family isn't at all happy with how his disappearance is being handled? Do I throw people under the bus? Because let me tell you, every character that I was introduced to when Sarah told me this story is shady as hell. Every character, with the exception of his family, his mom, his sister, his wife, ex-wife, I should say. Everyone else, there's something going on, okay? Crazy. Or, do I remain professional because I don't want to put a target on my back? And because, it's possible Chris's children will hear this one day and I don't want them to think I'm a terrible person, So I decided that I'd give you all a little bit of a mix. And here is what I have come up with. Christopher Dietterick was born on December 16th, 1977, to his parents Pamela Wiseman and Jan Dietterick. The family lived in Delaware until Chris entered the 10th grade. But at the time of his birth, the closest hospital to the family was in Maryland, so that is where Chris was born. In 1980, when Chris was 3 years old, his sister Sarah was born. The siblings were close growing up and had a relatively good childhood. This is until their parents got divorced when Chris was 10 years old. Prior to his parents' split, Chris was an average student and was active as most boys are. As a kid, he collected baseball cards, Legos, and Star Wars memorabilia. Playing baseball was his absolute favorite pastime, though, and he would play in leagues most of his childhood. Chris started out as a pitcher and was good at it, but during one of his games, he ended up hitting a few of the players on the opposing team. This happens, even in MLB, pitchers make mistakes and ping a batter from time to time. But hitting the other kids really upset Chris. It upset him so much that he vowed to never pitch again. He quit pitching that day. Instead, he switched to the catcher's position, and he fell even more in love with baseball, if, that was at all possible. Chris continued to play in the catcher's position for many years until he was diagnosed with Osgood-Schlatter disease. This disease is a condition associated with the knee joint and is most commonly found in young athletes who play sports that require a lot of running or jumping. Doctors let the Dietericks know that Chris likely developed this disorder after squatting in the catcher's position for long periods of time during the major growth points in his life. The disease would end up causing so much pain that Chris could no longer play in the catching position. He still played baseball, he just wasn't a catcher. And baseball wasn't just Chris's obsession. It was also a family activity for the Dietericks. Jan was often a coach for the teams Chris played, and Sarah and Pamela would sit in the bleachers to cheer on their guys. So it was a happy family memory. It was a good time. Everything sadly would fall apart in 1987 when Jan and Pam began the process of divorce. After the separation, 10-year-old Chris and 7-year-old Sarah, along with their mother, moved in with his grandmother, and nothing was ever the same again. No one is exactly sure what emotions were triggered with the divorce of his parents, but it is believed that this is the incident that set future events into motion for Chris. Divorce can be extremely traumatic, a traumatic experience, especially for children. The consequences of such trauma often manifest in negative behaviors that can carry on into adulthood. I'm sure a lot of us know someone who's a victim of divorce. I'll say a victim because, again, it's traumatic. If you're not one yourself, you know somebody. I'm almost 40 years old, and if my parents got divorced, I'd be devastated. So imagine a 10-year-old. According to Healthline.com, children between the ages of 6 and 12 are those most impacted by divorce. This age range is old enough for kids to remember how happy the family was before, but they're also old enough to understand more complex feelings around conflict and fault, even though they don't have a full grasp on it. Being 10 years old in the middle of such an upheaval to his daily routine and family life significantly affected Chris. So much so that he even quit playing baseball. Around 1992 or 93, Pamela moved with her children to Maryland, and that is where Chris and Sarah would meet their lifelong best friends. As a teen, Chris began to act out, but nothing out of the ordinary for a teenage boy. In my personal opinion, teenagers are never, ever fun, and hormones are the worst. But Chris's truest struggles wouldn't manifest themselves until more than a decade later. Even with hidden demons and feelings that Chris was fighting with, Sarah remembers that her baby-faced brother was inherently a really good person, really fun person to be around.
But yeah, Chris was a pretty cool guy. He loved to play jokes. As he got older, he got into the video game thing. Of course, when we were little, he would play Mario Brothers, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
And then he
Nintendo.
got into this extreme love for fast cars. Like he loved Gran Turismo was his favorite video game. And he always wanted a SS Mustang. Is it a Mustang? The SSI or no? It's SS Mustang, I think. Oh God, he's probably like, Sarah, are you kidding me? You're messing this up. He loved them, just the Mustangs and stuff, like Ford Mustangs and those Speedy Gonzales cars. That was his thing. He
Yeah.
loved them. Always wanted one. Um, yeah, he was extreme about it. But he was always just fun, very fun, jokester, prankster. Loved to pick on me, of course. I was his
That's what
favorite.
brothers are
I
for.
was his favorite target. Oh my God.
A page called Evaporate the Missing did a great blog on Chris. According to their coverage of him, quote, in the early 2000s, Chris met and married the love of his life, Shiloh. Shiloh and Chris attended high school together, but caught each other's eyes later on in life. The couple married, and shortly, Shiloh became pregnant. The couple had twins, a girl named Sarah and a boy named Michael, and they were the apple of their parents' eye. Chris and Shiloh were married for less than a decade, but their love for each other never faded. After their divorce, Chris moved in with his sister Sarah. Again, thanks to Evaporate the Missing's blog, I found out that in 2010, Chris was a manager at a company that was opening a new location out in Ohio. Chris was asked to travel to the state to open the store, and he went. Just before returning from Ohio, Chris met a woman. The pair became inseparable, and when Chris got back to Maryland, he brought his new lady along with him. Living back at home with Sarah, Sarah noticed a change in her brother that seemed to stem from his relationship with this new girlfriend. Sarah quickly found out that Chris was battling addiction and made the difficult decision to ask Chris to move out. Chris's relationship was short lived with this new woman, as they split after only 6 months of dating, but the addiction that he had picked up planned on sticking around. And, oftentimes addiction and homelessness do go hand in hand. Chris was no exception. More than once, Chris found himself in uncomfortable living situations with nowhere else to turn. At one point, Chris lived with an older man named Wayne, and I'm only using his name here because his name is used several other times in other places. So I felt comfortable enough with saying his name. Chris lived with Wayne, and Wayne had a drinking problem. Wayne tended to fly off the handle and would become extremely violent pretty often. No longer able to stand the toxic environment he was in, Chris left and was once again homeless. But that was only until he met another man by the name of Wes. Wes lived with his parents, Sue and Bill, on Locust Lane in Elkton, Maryland. After developing a bond, Chris was invited to move in with his new friend and stay at the home on Locust Lane. Wes sadly passed away in 2016 due to an illness. But before his death, Wes asked his parents to promise to let Chris to continue to live with them, and they agreed. After some time, the decision was made to have Chris move into a tent in Bill and Sue's backyard. You may be wondering why this man would move into a tent in someone's yard when he had a, perfectly good home to live in. Or you may have assumed that because he's a drug user, the owners didn't trust him or feared that he would steal something, put them in danger somehow. That's not the case at all. Chris was a lone wolf. He was a loner for sure. He enjoyed solitude and kept to himself whenever he could. So he started to feel a little bit of a burden to the couple. He wanted his own space. So he thought he would be more comfortable in a tent in the yard. Wes's parents even invited him back into the house of their home, instead of camping out, but he politely declined. And this is an edit. Um, I'm adding this in after re-listening to Sarah and I's discussion. It seems that Bill and Sue were hoarders. This is just one of the reasons that Chris would rather stay in the tent than be inside, because hoarders, there's a lot of trash, a lot of just everything. I didn't originally plan on stating this fact, but I do have a reason for it, which I'll get to, I promise.
And Wes's parents wanted him to stay inside, but Chris didn't want to. Like, he was never like that. Like, growing up, our parents built a house in Bear, Delaware. And there was 3 bedrooms upstairs and then a finished basement downstairs that had a room. It had 2 rooms down there, the bathroom, all that. Chris was up there until, I don't know how old he was when my mom was finally like, okay, you're allowed to be not on the same floor as us. Would you like the basement? Have your own bathroom. And then he's like, oh yeah, so excited. And then he had his own
Freedom.
domain. Yeah. He was fine with being by himself. Like, it did not bother him to be by himself. My mom said he was that way as a kid. He would play by himself. Like, whereas me, like, I would play by myself, but I wanted someone else to be with me.
Yeah.
It was more
It's
fun.
more fun. Yeah.
But, Chris preferred, hey, I'll be by myself. I'm fine. Like, when we were teenagers and moved to Maryland, he had the basement bedroom. Totally happy about it. Like, that was just him. Like, when he was with his wife and the kids, that was the most he was ever probably around people in his entire life. Growing up, like, yeah, he had to have dinner with us and all that stuff. But I
Yeah.
mean, once he hit, like, 10 and up, like, that was, he preferred to be by himself.
So it's probably hard for him to be married and have twins and just
Right.
someone around all the time.
Yeah. He worked third shift, so that kind of helped him out there because then, when he came home, of course, I mean, he had the kids, but his wife was at work and stuff like that. So
Gotcha.
he did still have some alone time, but he was a night owl. He really was. Like, he'd rather be up at night. So he just worked at night because of that.
During my interview with Sarah, I learned that Chris had a really, really rough medical history prior to his disappearance. You're getting ready to hear her tell us a little bit about just some of the issues her brother had in the past. You'll also hear about his insane love of Pearl Jam. Um, so just to go back to your brother being in the hospital, um, what happened? Like, what put him there?
He was having chest pains and trouble breathing, so he went into the hospital, and I guess that's when they found out he had the endocarditis. His left arm was like ginormous. He had so much fluid built up on his heart, and that basically ended up being what they said it was the endocarditis, and I guess it was probably from the intravenous drug usage.
Mm.
Got an infection in his arm from that, and of course he was ambidextrous, so he could do right or left. It didn't matter.
Okay.
So I guess he preferred to do the left arm. I'm supposing. I don't know, but I wish he would have used his right arm then, because that literally the infection went straight to his heart because it was on that side. Which was crazy because they were all about helping him until they found out that he was an addict, and then literally University of Maryland was doing everything they could to try to get him out of that hospital. They didn't want him there any longer. And that's when, that same time, they found out he didn't have health insurance. So they were like, yep, see ya, bye. So I had to fight to get him health insurance while I was in there, which gave some saving grace. But yeah, it was pretty scary. Like, it's funny what brought him out of his coma state, because they kept just, they're like, we're gonna slowly wean him off. That's what they started doing when they found out that he had no health insurance. They were like, oh, we got to get him out of this coma, because we got to get him out of here. He wasn't responding to that. And I had his cell phone, and his cell phone had a couple Pearl Jam songs on it, and that was his favorite band. I started playing him some songs. I don't remember how many I got into it before I got to the song Black, which was his absolute favorite song. And my mom's like, I cannot believe you played him Black. That is literally about like a dead person. I'm like, Mom, whatever.
Yeah.
So I'm playing Black, and he literally tries to mouth the words in his coma state. And from that point forward, he slowly came out, and the rest is history. He came out of it all and went to rehab, learned how to walk, and all that stuff all over again. But Pearl Jam Black is what brought him out of it.
That's amazing.
Yeah. My mom's like, Black of all songs. I'm like, hey, your son's alive, so you're
Whatever
welcome.
works, Mom.
Right? A year.
Chris's medical issues are the perfect segue into what happened to him the day that he was last seen. Quite some years after his coma, Chris was diagnosed with melanoma in his leg in 2019. He had a gnarly mole that he kept ignoring that turned out to be cancerous. The extreme pain and discomfort caused by the cancer led to Chris walking with a limp. He was only able to walk short distances, not only because of the pain, but because his leg would often swell up, like pretty much like a balloon. Chris was seeking treatment for the melanoma and was receiving immunotherapy at the University of Maryland Hospital in Elkton. His treatment center was only half a mile from where he was staying on Locust Lane, but he often took advantage of free medical transportation that was offered to him just to save himself from, the uncomfortable journey. On the morning of May 30th, 2019, Chris headed over to the help center because on the 28th, he had left his backup cell phone battery on the transport van after his appointment. His phone was his lifeline, but it was an older phone and died like often. You know how after your phone gets a couple years old, even a year old, the battery just dies quickly. So he liked having an extra battery on him at all times. Surveillance footage from outside the center shows Chris leaving the building and walking away with two other individuals at roughly 11:11 a.m. That number specifically stood out to Sarah as it is an angel number. I too look for signs and symbols like this, so I wanted to make sure I put that in there for her. She made sure she mentioned 11:11, so I thought that was interesting. Chris did plan on walking the 2 minutes back home to the Locust Lane and bid farewell to the man and woman seen in the video with him. These acquaintances claimed that once Chris exited, they walked out of the parking lot and went their separate ways, but not before Chris said that he would call them later. As far as investigators are concerned, these are the last two people to see Chris alive. On June 5th, the family got a call because Chris didn't show up for his appointment that day. Knowing Chris's history, they didn't panic right away and decided to allow a few days to pass just in case he popped up like he normally did. I'm going to insert a clip here from Sarah and I's discussion. I do speak towards the very end, and I am hard to hear, but I don't say anything important, so don't turn your volume all the way up just to hear me mumble 6 words. I wanted to warn you of that.
But when I went to Sue and Bill on the 7th, I waited 2 days because the time before when I couldn't get him, it took 2 days before I got him. Still couldn't get him, so I was like, I have to report this. I went to the sheriff's department. They said they couldn't take the case, like that I couldn't file there because of where his last known location was in the town limits. So I had to go to Elkton Police. So I did that. Left there, went to Sue and Bill's. They wouldn't let me go look at his tent. They said my dog's back there. Okay, well, I'd seen their freaking dog before. I've been there numerous times. Every time I picked up Chris, it was there. The dog knew me. They wouldn't let me go back there. Okay, whatever. Well, within that week, I went back to Sue and Bill's. They had taken everything down and thrown it all away. Everything. And I said, well, where's his stuff? Well, he didn't have much. Well, is that for you to decide?
Right.
That's like my brother's stuff. He has children. Like, I don't know. I know it was in your backyard, but dang. I understand you say you had to take it down because you were going to be fined $1,000 a day. But didn't you just put it in a pile or in a box or something? My brother said they were hoarders. That's why one of the main reasons he didn't want to stay inside, because they were hoarders and there was so much crap in their house. But you're going to throw his stuff away like it's nothing.
That doesn't make sense.
No, not at all.
And why wouldn't you keep it for him to get when he comes back?
Yeah, right. You were just so adamant he was done. He was never coming back. Like, how'd you know that?
Yeah, how?
So, and they never went and investigated the house. Conley told me that they couldn't just go to their house because there was no known struggle there. And I'm like, yeah, but I've watched a lot of shows and I understand you. Like, these are true crime shows, not like a murder mystery, like
Right.
that's made up, like a fictional story. These are like based on true stories. They go to the place your last known address.
Yeah.
They contact the ex-wife. Okay, Shiloh had to contact the police to give her a freaking thing. She had to force herself upon them.
Do
They
you have
never even took a test. They never even asked me anything. They never took a testimony from me. Never even
I don't-
asked me hey, do you know this about Chris? Nothing. I have yet to this day been questioned about his disappearance.
do you have any faith in law enforcement after this?
In Cecil County, absolutely not.
Uh, so you just heard Sarah say that Bill and Sue threw out all of Chris's belongings. Hoarders typically don't throw anything out, ever. And that's why I mentioned earlier that they were known to be hoarders, according to Chris. And Chris's social security checks were sent to the home every month. Wouldn't they assume that a known drug user who is homeless would show up at some point to collect the check? None of this is being mentioned to point the fingers at the couple who let Chris live with them for so long. It's just to share some of the many, many odd occurrences that took place after Chris vanished. So what exactly happened to Chris after he exits that video? The number of theories and possibilities are literally endless. The Dietterick family and people close to Chris all have a few scenarios in mind, but without any solid evidence or witnesses to come forward, there's just too many unanswered questions. Sarah and her family have gotten so desperate for answers that they've hired a private investigator. In Sarah's opinion, Elkton police are hindering others' investigations into Chris's disappearance. One example she gave me was that Back on March 25th of this year, 2024, the PI hired by the Dietericks was told that his request for details on the case would be sent over after, specific sensitive information like social security numbers and things like that were removed. 9 days later, the PI was told that his request was never submitted. Odd. Marissa Jones, who is the host of the Vanish podcast, also hit roadblocks in her own investigation and was given the runaround when she asked for a copy of the police report. If you actually take a second and think about it, how would it look if someone from the outside came in and solved this case after 5 years of nothing from the police? They're not going to want that to happen, right? But let's just say that one day the person or persons responsible for what happened to Chris are identified and arrested. Let's hypothetical here. One can assume that charges would be filed, court date would be set, and depending on how those charges are pled, there would either be a trial or we would go straight to sentencing. We've all seen movies, TV shows. At least that's how most of us would presume the system works. Well, folks, working on this show for a year now has taught me that what we see in movies and TV is not actually how the criminal justice system works at all. Sarah gave me a plethora of examples of criminals just getting a slap on the wrist in Cecil County and the Elkton area. I'm going to give you 2 of those scenarios of crimes committed, and I'll let you guess how the events unfolded for each situation before I let you know what actually happened. We're going to play like a little game here. Scenario 1. Imagine this. It's the middle of the day on a spring afternoon in 2021. COVID's over. It's been a year. Everyone's over it. Let's go outside, right? You're going on about your day when you hear some of your neighbors really getting into it. They're arguing, right? They're outside for everyone to see, screaming and carrying on, so it's impossible to ignore. From what you can hear, allegedly the guy cheated on his girlfriend or something along those lines. And after quite a show, things finally settle down and you carry on with whatever it is you were doing. The next thing you know, there are flames visible from the front door of that neighbor's house, and a woman is sitting in a folding chair on the front lawn just watching the house burn. You call 911. Other neighbors call 911 because that's what you do when you see a house on fire. Someone is trapped in the basement of the house, and one of the neighbors runs over to help. There's so much chaos going on that you don't notice when the woman stands up and casually walks away. What the hell is going on, right? Thankfully, no one was injured, and the arsonist is arrested. You find out that after the argument took place, that woman sitting in the chair on the front lawn set multiple fires in the house she lived in with 3 other people. The charges filed include first and second degree attempted murder, first degree arson, first degree assault, 2 counts of malicious burning first degree, 2 counts of malicious destruction of property, and 2 counts of reckless endangerment. Turns out this lady has a history of starting/attempting to start fires and even tried burning that same house down just 2 months prior. Okay, after all of that, think about what should have happened versus what actually happened, okay? Gail Metwally, the firebug sitting in the chair, was looking at a possible 30-year sentence for her charges. What was your guess for the outcome? For the life of me, I couldn't find any updates on what the sentencing was, but I do know for a fact that this woman is free and roaming around Elkton like nothing happened. And that was in 2021. How she avoided a 30-year sentence is completely beyond me. I did see something where, she's suspected of having a mental illness of some sort. But why is she out walking around? Mind blowing, right? Okay. Scenario numero dos. This one is actually really, really sad, by the way. Um, August 18th, 2014, a 16-year-old Jesse Vesey Jr. disappeared from Hollingsworth Manor in Elkton. One day later, 19-year-old Ricardo Levenberry vanished from Hollingsworth Manor as well. Both boys were murdered by 30-year-old Donald Ray Bennett, who also lived in the same exact neighborhood. Bennett even admitted to strangling both young men and was indicted on 2 counts of first-degree murder and 2 counts of second-degree murder. He was convicted and sentenced. But I bet you can't guess how this one turns out. Bennett accepted a plea deal and will only end up serving half of his sentence. At the time of his arrest, the remains of Vesey and Levenberry had not been recovered. As part of his plea agreement, Bennett promised to leave authorities to the bodies. Acting on his directions, investigators found Vesey's remains in Little Elk Creek beneath Interstate 95 overpass, 40 yards from the southbound lane of Blue Ball Road. The decomposed body was covered by a tree root and some rocks. Investigators don't ever expect to be able to find Ricardo's body, though, because Bennett said he put it in a trash bin behind West End Gardens. The bin's contents were hauled to the Cecil County landfill, and finding remains in that place after so much time had passed was not likely. So they essentially gave up on finding that young man. Bennett looks to serve 30 years in prison, so he'll be 60 when he gets out. Most would think, I think, that being released at 60 and still being able to live life outside of prison isn't justice for 2 absolutely senseless murders. Sarah thought that this guy was out and about, but from the research I did, he's still incarcerated. I'm not sure, but yeah, that's it. That's his slap on the wrist. Elkton, Maryland is the 3rd most dangerous city in the state. Baltimore, of course, is number 1. Ocean City is a vacation destination and sits at number 2, only because of the high robbery and sexual assault rates. But Elkton is named one of the most dangerous cities in Maryland, as it has higher violent crime rate than the rest of the country. I repeat, COUNTRY, country, not county. Elkton's murder rate is 25 per 1,000 residents, which means that is more than 4 times the national average. Apparently, crime happens all the time in Cecil County. So, whoever is responsible for what happened to Chris, do they ever get nervous? I'm sure they have it in their heads that all of this has taken so long, police can't tie up any loose ends, no one's ever going to figure this out, no one's ever going to prove anything. And I don't blame them for thinking that. Here we are 5 years later, and we've got nada. And even though so much time has passed, with the persistence of Sarah, more and more people are learning about Chris and his disappearance. There are a lot of players to take into account, and I do mean a lot, but eventually the dots are going to be connected. Sarah Dietterick and her family have had 5 years to go over any and every possible result to their search. She knows that her brother is no longer alive, and she's come to terms with that. But I'll pose my question again and ask, what will happen if the person responsible is ever caught? What kind of justice can the Dietricks count on? They may finally get answers to some of the questions they've had all this time, but will an appropriate punishment be handed down? Before I wrap this up, I do want to mention the charity that Chris's children have created in his memory. Every year, the twins and other family members collect items such as coats, gloves, socks, toothbrushes, and other items to pass out to members of the homeless community in their area. The organization is called Chris's Cause, and they deliver donated items on Chris's birthday, December 16th. If you are ever in a giving mood and want to help someone out, I ask that you consider donating to these 2 because it means a lot to them and it would mean a lot to Chris. They do have a Facebook page. You can look up Chris's Cause. It's not hard to find. I personally will be donating to them this year. Um, so yeah, check that out. Uh, Thank you for listening. And if you thought nothing ever happened here, this episode should teach you. You are wrong.